With tears in her eyes, a single mother-to-be opened the wrong door and came face to face with the most feared CEO. A forbidden love that would change their lives forever. A story of overcoming, redemption, and love that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The April rain pounded against the windows of the most imposing business complex on Fifth Avenue, creating a melancholic rhythm that echoed through the empty corridors of the 40th floor. Sarah Johnson gripped the handle of the broom tightly, her calloused fingers trembling slightly as she pushed the cleaning cart down the mirrored hallways that seemed to stretch infinitely. At 28 years old and 6 months pregnant, she had developed a peculiar cleaning technique that accommodated her growing belly. Leaning to the side, protecting her abdomen with one hand while meticulously working with the other. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from some still-lit office, mingling with the aroma of damp earth that seeped through the cracks of the poorly sealed windows. Sarah paused for a moment, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. That smell always transported her back to the little bakery in her neighborhood in East Side, where her grandmother used to take her on Sunday mornings after church. "Sweetheart, good coffee is like good people. You can smell it from afar," the old lady would say in her warm, wise voice. But the fond memory was interrupted by the weight of the crumpled envelope in her navy blue uniform pocket. The ultrasound. She had come straight from General Hospital, where she had spent 3 hours waiting in line for a 15-minute appointment that had completely changed her world. "It's a girl," the doctor had said with a tired smile, adjusting her glasses while pointing at the tiny figure on the grainy screen. "She's perfectly fine, but you need to take better care of yourself. Your blood pressure is a bit high." Sarah had held back tears during the entire bus ride, crossing the city from east to west as Maplewood gradually transformed, from the simple buildings and local shops of the East Side to the mirrored skyscrapers and imported cars of Fifth Avenue. Now, alone in that sterile and silent environment, her emotions finally overflowed. A girl, she would have a daughter to raise alone without anyone's help, especially not after Raphael's cowardly escape when he found out about the pregnancy. "I'm not ready to be a dad, Sarah," he had said 3 months ago, avoiding her gaze while packing his few belongings in the 2-room apartment they shared in Maplewood. "You're amazing, but this is too big for me right now." And just like a ghost, he vanished from her life, leaving only the echo of broken promises and the weight of a responsibility she never imagined she would carry alone. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand and checked the watch on her wrist. A graduation gift from high school that her mother had bought in 12 installments on her credit card. 2:15 in the morning. She needed to finish cleaning the executive floor before 4 when the next shift of security personnel arrived. Ms. Johnson, the general cleaning supervisor, had been clear. "Sarah, you work the night shift because it's better for everyone. No one wants to see a pregnant woman in uniform when they come into work in the morning. It's a matter of professional presentation." The humiliation still burned in her chest, but Sarah had swallowed her pride. She needed the job, the $800 a month that barely covered the rent of the room she shared with 2 roommates, but was her only source of income. Graduated in literature from Maplewood University through a scholarship program, she had dreamed of being a teacher, maybe even writing. She kept notebooks full of poetry in her drawer, verses that emerged during sleepless nights and spoke of hope, love, and overcoming. But dreams, as she discovered, don't always withstand the weight of reality. The corridor on the 40th floor was a maze of identical doors, all made of smoked glass with discreet gold plaques. Sarah knew every inch of that space. The conference room with the mahogany table that seated 20 people, the directors' offices with their Italian leather chairs, the executive pantry always stocked with gourmet coffee and imported water. It was a world completely different from hers, where the cost of a suit would be equivalent to her salary for 6 months. Confused by emotion and fatigue, Sarah turned right instead of left when looking for the women's restroom. The tears blurred her vision, and she didn't notice that the gold plaque on the door said Executive Presidency instead of Women's Restroom. With a heavy heart and a distant mind, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The environment was entirely different from anything she had ever seen. The presidential office occupied a space the size of the entire apartment where she lived. Huge, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of sleeping Maplewood, with the city lights twinkling like earthly stars. A bookshelf covered the entire left wall, filled with leather-bound volumes that seemed to have been meticulously organized. The desk, an imposing piece of dark wood, was illuminated by a bronze lamp that created an almost intimate atmosphere in the vast space. And there, bent over piles of documents, was he. Gabriel Smith was 40 years old and had the posture of someone born to lead. Even at this hour of the morning, his brown hair was perfectly styled, only a few rebellious strands betraying the long hours of work. He wore a light blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing defined forearms, and a loosened tie that suggested the end of a particularly long day. His honey-colored eyes, intensely focused on the papers in front of him, held an expression of absolute concentration. Sarah stood frozen in place. Sarah entered, still holding the broom as if it were a protective shield. The ultrasound slipped from her trembling hand and fell to the marble floor with a dry thud that echoed through the silence of the office. The sound made Gabriel lift his eyes from the documents, and for a moment that felt eternal. Their gazes met. I'm so sorry, Sarah stammered, feeling the heat rise from her neck to her cheeks. I thought it was the bathroom. I didn't know anyone was here. Please, forgive me. Gabriel watched her in silence for a few seconds, noticing her red, tear-stained eyes, the pronounced belly beneath her uniform, and the wounded dignity etched in every line of her face. Instead of the explosive anger that any employee would expect from the most feared CEO in Maplewood, he simply said, "No problem. The bathroom is at the end of the hall to the left." Sarah quickly bent down to pick up the ultrasound, but her haste and nervousness caused her to trip over her own broom. The cleaning cart swayed dangerously, and several papers from Gabriel's desk flew to the floor. Mortified, she knelt and began to frantically gather everything. "Please, let me help," Gabriel said, rising from his chair. "No, no need," Sarah protested, still on her knees, gathering the documents with trembling hands. "It was my fault. I'll fix everything. Please, don't fire me. I need this job." The raw vulnerability in her voice stirred something in Gabriel's chest. He bent down and gently touched her wrist, making her stop picking up the papers. "No one is getting fired," he said, in a surprisingly soft voice. "Accidents happen." Sarah finally lifted her eyes to him, and Gabriel felt as if he were seeing that woman for the first time. There was a quiet strength in her features, a natural beauty that didn't need makeup or expensive clothes to manifest. Her brown eyes, despite the tears, sparkled with an intelligence that intrigued him immediately. "What's your name?" he asked, helping her to her feet. "Sarah," she replied softly, still avoiding direct eye contact. "Sarah Johnson. I work on the night cleaning team." Gabriel nodded, committing the name to memory. There was something about this woman that unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the way she gathered the papers so carefully, as if each document were precious. Or maybe it was the dignity with which she apologized, without belittling herself or begging excessively. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that, in his 40 years of life, he had never seen such strength and vulnerability coexisting in a single person. "Sarah," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "Well, Sarah, have a good night, and try to get some rest. You look tired." She nodded quickly, grabbed her broom and hurried out of the office, leaving a subtle trail of cheap perfume and soap, a striking contrast to the sophisticated scents Gabriel was accustomed to, but somehow felt more authentic than any French fragrance. Alone again in his office, Gabriel found himself staring at the door through which she had exited. For the first time in years, the financial reports in front of him seemed completely irrelevant. Outside, Sarah leaned against the corridor wall, her heart pounding so loudly that she was sure Gabriel could hear it through the closed door. She instinctively touched her belly and whispered to her unborn daughter, "Mommy almost lost her job today, my love, but it won't happen again, I promise." She had no way of knowing that this chance encounter had planted a seed that would grow in ways neither of them could foresee. 2 weeks passed since the incident in the executive office, and Sarah noticed subtle changes in her routine that she couldn't explain. First, it was the schedule. Ms. Johnson had shown up on a Monday with a new timetable, announcing in her harsh, authoritative voice that Sarah would now work from 2 to 6 in the morning, instead of the 11 at night to 3 in the morning shift. "Internal reorganization," the supervisor had murmured, avoiding direct eye contact with Sarah as she pinned the new schedule to the bulletin board in the staff room, a cramped cubicle in the basement of the building that permanently smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. "Building security issues. Don't ask, just comply." Sarah didn't question it. She had learned, over the 5 months working there, that questioning Ms. Johnson's decisions was an invitation to trouble. The supervisor, a woman in her 50s with bleached hair and an outdated perm, ruled the cleaning team with an iron fist and a sharp tongue. She took particular pleasure in humiliating the younger employees, especially those who, like Sarah, had some formal education. "If you think you're so smart, why are you here cleaning the floor?" was her favorite line, delivered with a cruel smile that never reached her small, calculating eyes. But Sarah was grateful for the change in schedule. It meant she now got home by 7 in the morning, when the sun was already painting the windows of the room she shared in Maplewood. She could have breakfast with her roommates, Jessica, a clothing store saleswoman in the nearby shopping district, and Fernanda, who worked as a clerk in a 24-hour pharmacy. It was comforting to hear their conversations about relationships, weekend plans, and small but real dreams, while preparing her oatmeal enriched with prenatal vitamins. The second change was even more subtle. The executive floor, which had previously been her exclusive territory during the night cleaning, now always had someone working late when she arrived. Not always the same person, but almost invariably there was at least one lit office, a human presence that broke the sepulchral silence of that corporate environment. Sarah developed theories to explain the coincidence. Perhaps it was the end of the quarter, a time for important reports, or maybe the company was undergoing some restructuring that required long hours. In the executive's workspace, it didn't occur to Sarah Johnson that Gabriel Smith had subtly rearranged his own schedule to ensure there was always movement on the floor when she arrived for work. The third change was the most puzzling of all. Someone had left a bottle of imported prenatal vitamins in the drawer of the executive lounge's coffee table, along with a discreet note. "For any expecting employee in need, best wishes." Sarah discovered it by chance when she went to clean the drawer that traditionally held only expensive napkins and crystal sugar. She held the bottle in her trembling hands, reading and rereading the label. Those vitamins cost over $200, a quarter of her monthly salary. At the public health system, she only received basic iron sulfate and folic acid. Her gynecologist had mentioned that more comprehensive vitamins would be ideal for the baby's development, but the price made them a distant dream. Sarah stood in the lounge for 10 minutes, internally debating whether she should take the vitamins. Her pride battled against her concern for her daughter's health. In the end, maternal love won. She took the bottle, but left a handwritten note in careful handwriting in the drawer. "Thank you very much. I will pay you back as soon as possible. S.J." What she didn't know was that Gabriel was watching her comings and goings through the building's security cameras, a habit he had developed without even realizing it. He noticed how she always double-checked that the doors were securely locked, how she meticulously organized her cleaning supplies, how she sometimes paused to admire the city view through the enormous windows on the 40th floor. Gabriel had spent the 2 weeks since their first meeting trying to convince himself that his interest in Sarah was merely humanitarian. After all, she was a pregnant employee going through difficulties. It would be natural for him, as a responsible CEO, to care about the well-being of his team. But this rationalization began to unravel when he found himself arriving at the office earlier, hoping to run into her in the hallways. On a particularly busy Thursday, with meetings extending until 2 in the morning, Gabriel finally had the opportunity he had subconsciously sought. He was organizing documents at his desk when he heard the familiar sound of the cleaning cart in the hallway. His heart raced in a way he hadn't felt in years. Sarah entered the executive lounge to grab clean cloths and found Gabriel preparing coffee in the Italian machine that occupied a corner of the room. He was wearing dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his tie already abandoned on the counter. His hair was slightly tousled, and there was a shadow of stubble that made him appear more approachable, less intimidating than the polished image he maintained during office hours. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound casual while internally grappling with how to start a conversation. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," Sarah replied formally, quickly grabbing the cleaning cloths. She still felt uncomfortable in his presence, constantly reminded of the vast difference between their worlds. "Please just call me Gabriel," he said, pouring a cup of coffee. "Would you like some? The coffee is fresh." Sarah hesitated. Accepting would break an invisible barrier between boss and employee. Refusing would be rude. Besides, the rich aroma of the gourmet coffee awakened a hunger she didn't know she had. I'm not sure if I can. Ms. Johnson always said we shouldn't use the executive's things." Gabriel felt a twinge of irritation at Ms. Johnson, but kept his voice calm. "Well, I'm the owner of the company, so I think I can authorize a cup of coffee for a hard-working employee." Sarah accepted the cup with careful hands, as if it were made of the most delicate crystal. The coffee was unlike anything she had ever tasted, smooth, full-bodied, with notes of chocolate dancing on her palate. It was the kind of flavor she only knew from television commercials. "Is it good?" Gabriel asked, observing the genuine look of pleasure on her face. "It's wonderful," Sarah replied honestly. "I've never had coffee like this." They shared a comfortable silence for a few moments, she savoring the coffee and he watching how her eyes lit up with small pleasures. Gabriel wondered when was the last time someone in his life had shown such gratitude for something so simple. "How are you feeling?" he asked suddenly, gesturing subtly to her belly. "The pregnancy, I mean." Sarah instinctively touched her belly, where her daughter had begun to move more frequently. "Well, thank you. The baby is quite active, especially at night." "Is it your first child?" "Yes," Sarah replied, and Gabriel caught a hint of melancholy in her voice. "It's a girl. You must be excited." Sarah smiled, but the smile didn't fully reach her eyes. "I am. I'm also scared. It's a lot of responsibility for one person." Gabriel wanted to ask about the baby's father, but something in Sarah's posture, the way she slightly closed off, warned him that this was painful territory. "I'm sure you'll be a wonderful mother," he said sincerely. "I see how you work, the dedication you put into everything you do. That says a lot about your character." The compliment caught Sarah off guard. She was used to criticism, comments about her condition, judgmental looks. Hearing words of encouragement from someone like Gabriel Smith, a man who ran a business empire, made her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she managed to murmur. That means a lot." Gabriel finished his coffee and checked the time. "Well, I better let you get back to work. Have a good night, Sarah." "Good night, Mr. Gabriel." After he left, Sarah remained in the lounge for a few more minutes, slowly finishing her coffee and trying to process the conversation. There was something about the way Gabriel spoke to her, without condescension, without pity, just with genuine kindness, that stirred feelings that she had taken a leave of absence months ago. When she finally returned to work, she didn't realize that Gabriel had intentionally forgotten his tie on the break room counter, ensuring an excuse to come back the next day. There in his office, Gabriel sat in his chair and looked out the window at the city, slowly waking up. New York City never completely slept. There were always flashing lights and life happening. But for the first time in years, he felt part of that vibrant life instead of just a distant observer. Sarah Johnson had entered his existence in a completely unexpected way, and Gabriel was beginning to suspect that his life would never be the same. June arrived in New York City, bringing with it the characteristic chill of early summer and preparations for the company picnic. Sarah watched from the bus window as decorations began to appear on the streets, colorful banners strung between lampposts, posters announcing games, and stalls selling roasted corn at the corners. The sweet smell of peanut candy wafting through the open windows reminded her of school fairs when she was a child, when her biggest worry was borrowing a dress for the festivities and learning the dance steps. Now, 6.5 months pregnant, Sarah could hardly imagine participating in any festivities. Her navy blue uniform had been replaced by a maternity version that Miss Johnson had handed over with evident reluctance, grumbling about unnecessary additional costs. Her belly had grown considerably, bringing with it the typical discomforts: back pain, swollen feet, and a constant fatigue that made each night of work a greater challenge. But there were also positive changes that she couldn't fully explain. The mysterious vitamins that regularly appeared in the break room drawer had made a difference in her energy levels. Her blood tests at the health clinic had improved, and the doctor had commented, surprised, about her good levels of iron and vitamins. Sarah continued leaving thank-you notes and promises of payment, although she never received a response. Casual conversations with Gabriel also became part of her routine. They weren't planned meetings, at least not from her perspective, but they happened with a frequency that began to feel natural. Sometimes he was in the break room making coffee, other times checking documents in the conference room when she passed by to clean. The conversations were always respectful, about general topics, how she was feeling, if she needed anything, comments about the weather or news of the day. Gabriel had become a comforting presence during her lonely nights. He had the gift of making her feel seen, not as the pregnant cleaner who was a bother, but as a person with valid opinions and feelings. When she casually mentioned that she was reading Near to the Wild Heart during her breaks, borrowed from the neighborhood library, Gabriel spent 20 minutes discussing the complexity of Clarice Lispector's characters with a passion that surprised her. "Joanna is a character that marks any reader," he said, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "The way Clarice portrays the search for identity, especially feminine, it's revolutionary even today." Sarah was taken aback. She hadn't expected the CEO of a multinational company to not only know Brazilian literature, but to discuss it with such depth. "You really enjoy literature?" she had asked, momentarily forgetting the formalities. "I graduated in literature before pursuing business," Gabriel revealed with a nearly shy smile. "My dad almost had a heart attack when he found out I wanted to be a literature teacher. I ended up following the business path, but I never lost my love for books." This revelation created an unexpected connection between them. Sarah began to see Gabriel not just as the millionaire boss, but as someone who, like her, had abandoned literary dreams in favor of practical needs. It was in this context that the announcement about the company picnic arrived. Ms. Johnson appeared in the staff room on a Tuesday with a mimeographed sheet and an expression that suggested she was announcing a catastrophe. "The management has decided that this year the picnic will include all employees," she said with obvious displeasure. "This means that you, from the cleaning staff, are also invited, but don't get it twisted. You will be there to serve, not to enjoy it as guests." Sarah felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She had never participated in a company event beyond the mandatory safety training. The idea of seeing that corporate world in a more relaxed setting was both fascinating and frightening. The picnic would be held on the rooftop of the building, a spacious area that Sarah only knew from photos on the company website. Ms. Johnson assigned the roles. Some staff would handle the buffet, others would serve drinks, and Sarah would be responsible for the traditional sweet stall. An irony, since she had learned to make treats from her grandma Mary, who had come from a small town in the South in the 1970s, carrying centuries-old recipes in her memory. On the day of the picnic, Sarah arrived 2 hours early to help with the preparations. The rooftop had been transformed into a true urban fair. Crepe paper banners fluttered between the metal structures, wooden stalls decorated, recreated a rural atmosphere, and ambient music played country and folk music. The panoramic view of New York City created a surreal contrast, the rural tradition framed by the concrete jungle of the metropolis. Sarah wore her cleanest uniform and had styled her hair in a neat bun. Even pregnant, she maintained the upright posture and dignity that Gabriel had noticed from their first meeting. At the stall designated for her, she carefully organized the trays of sweets she had prepared at home. Freshly grated coconut candies, chocolate truffles, and corn cakes wrapped in corn husks. Recipes her grandma had taught her during school vacations in her hometown. The aroma emanating from the stall was irresistible. The golden coconut candy exuded the sweet scent of fresh coconut mixed with brown sugar. The corn cakes, still, the warm scents of sweet corn seasoned with condensed milk and cinnamon wafted through the air. Sarah had woken up at 5 in the morning to prepare everything, using the few ingredients she managed to buy with the leftover money after paying the essential bills. The administrative staff began to arrive at 7 in the evening. Sarah watched them from a distance, elegant women, in expensive dresses adapted to the picnic theme, men in designer plaid shirts and jeans that cost more than her monthly salary. They moved through the space with the ease of those who belonged to that world, greeting each other with familiarity and laughing at inside jokes. Sarah remained at her stall, serving sweets with a polite smile and responding to compliments with a discreet "thank you." Some customers were genuinely kind, while others treated her with the indifference reserved for invisible laborers. She had learned to accept both attitudes without letting them affect her spirits. It was then that Gabriel appeared. He wore a blue and white plaid shirt that accentuated his honey-colored eyes, dark jeans, and a slightly uncomfortable expression, as if he were not entirely at ease in the festive atmosphere. Sarah saw him before he noticed her, politely conversing with a group of executives near the drinks stall. Her heart raced involuntarily, a reaction she had been trying to ignore for weeks. Gabriel scanned the area until he found her. When their eyes met across the crowd, he smiled, not the polished smile he reserved for other guests, but something warmer, more genuine. He excused himself from the group of executives and walked toward her stall. "Good evening, Sarah," he said as he reached the makeshift counter. "What a wonderful selection of sweets you've prepared." Sarah felt warmth rise to her cheeks. Having Gabriel there in her culinary territory was both thrilling and terrifying. "Good evening, Gabriel. I hope you enjoy them. They are recipes from my grandmother." Gabriel examined the options with genuine interest, not the polite hurry of other customers. "This coconut candy has the perfect color," he commented, pointing to a tray where the sweets shone golden like little suns. "Can I try it?" Sarah served a generous portion on a paper plate, watching anxiously as Gabriel tasted it. She saw his eyes close for a moment, a look of genuine pleasure crossing his face. "Wow," he murmured, savoring it slowly. "This reminds me of my grandfather's farm in Pennsylvania. My great-grandmother used to make coconut candies like this, with freshly grated coconut and brown sugar. The flavor is identical." Sarah's face lit up with pride and surprise. "Your great-grandmother was also from the countryside. She was born and raised in a small town. I learned to make sugar candy with her when I was 8 years old," Gabriel revealed. And for the first time, Sarah saw in him not the powerful CEO, but a boy who held affectionate memories of childhood. "After she passed away, I never had coconut candy like hers again, until today." They chatted for a few more minutes about family traditions and recipes, a conversation that flowed with surprising ease. Gabriel asked to try the corn cakes and chocolate truffles, praising each one with evident sincerity. He was in the process of buying when Ms. Johnson appeared like a shadow beside the stall. "Mr. Smith," the supervisor said in a syrupy voice that Sarah rarely heard, "it's nice to see you here. I hope you're not being bothered. Sarah, you have other customers waiting." Sarah looked around and saw that there was no one in line, but she understood the message. Miss Johnson was establishing hierarchies, reminding her of her place. Gabriel also caught the message, and his expression hardened imperceptibly. "I'm not being bothered at all," he said with a firmness that made Miss Johnson take a step back. "In fact, I was just congratulating Sarah on the exceptional quality of her sweets. I rarely taste something so authentic." The supervisor forced a tight smile. "That's great, Mr. Smith. Sarah has always been dedicated." The tone suggested anything but praise, and Gabriel noticed. He waved goodbye to Sarah with a warm gesture and walked away, but not before casting a cold glance at Ms. Johnson that made her shift uncomfortably. The rest of the night passed in a blur of customers and sales. Sarah's sweets were a hit. She sold out before 10 o'clock, something unprecedented at company picnics. Several employees returned to buy more, and some even asked if she took orders. When the party ended and Sarah helped clean the terrace, she found Gabriel alone near the railing, watching the city lights. He had lost the stiffness from earlier in the evening and seemed more relaxed, more human. "Thank you for the coconut candy," he said as she approached with a broom. "You made my night very special." "Thank you for being kind," Sarah replied. "You didn't have to." Gabriel looked her in the eyes, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. "Sarah, I want you to know one thing. Everything I do because you deserve it, not out of pity or charity, because you deserve it." Before she could respond, he stepped away, leaving her alone on the terrace with her heart racing and the certainty that her life was taking a turn she had never imagined. The month of July brought with it the harsh winter of New York City and a discovery that would shake the carefully constructed structures of Sarah's routine. It was a particularly cold Tuesday when she arrived at work and found Jessica, one of the afternoon cleaners, waiting for her in the staff room with a serious expression on her face. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Jessica said, her nervous hands fiddling with the strap of her worn bag. "It's about your schedule." Sarah hung her cheap wool jacket in the metal locker and turned to her colleague, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. "What about my schedule?" Jessica looked around, ensuring they were alone, and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Miss Johnson, I was talking to Fatima from General Supervision yesterday afternoon. I was cleaning the room next door and heard everything." She paused, as if gathering courage. "Sarah, she found out that you've been pregnant since you started working here, and since then she's been sabotaging your shifts on purpose." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, sabotaging?" "She put you on the night shift because she knew it would be harder for you, especially being pregnant. And that's not all." Jessica swallowed hard. "She's marking absences you didn't have, reporting non-existent delays, creating a dossier to fire you for just cause as soon as the baby is born." Sarah leaned against the cabinet, feeling her legs weaken. The cruel reality of that revelation hit her like a punch to the stomach. Ms. Johnson wasn't just being unfriendly. She was systematically destroying her professional stability. "But why?" Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Jessica. "Jealousy, Sarah. You're beautiful, young, smart. You have a college degree. Ms. Johnson has always been jealous of younger girls, but with you it's different. She hates you because you don't lower yourself. You don't beg. You don't accept humiliation quietly." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process the information. All the mysterious schedule changes, the constant criticisms, the malicious glares. It all made sense now. She was being professionally hunted by a woman who saw her as an inexplicable threat. "There's more," Jessica continued, her voice even lower. "She found out about the vitamins someone leaves for you in the break room. She's investigating who it is, said she will fire anyone who is giving handouts to employees." Sarah's heart raced. Someone, she suspected who, was risking trouble to help her, and now Ms. Johnson had turned it into a witch hunt. "Jessica, thank you for telling me, but why are you warning me? If Ms. Johnson finds out—" The other woman, a few years older and with 3 children to support, shrugged with a sad smile. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because if it were me, I'd want someone to warn me." Sarah spent the rest of that night working with a heavy heart and a restless mind. Every time she saw Ms. Johnson in the hallways, the supervisor had a habit of appearing unexpectedly to check on the work. She felt a mix of anger and fear. She couldn't lose that job. Not now, not with a daughter to support in 2 months. It was during one of those distressing mental rounds that she found Gabriel in the executive break room, not by chance, but because he had developed the habit of working late on Tuesdays, creating opportunities for seemingly casual encounters. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the papers he was organizing. But he immediately noticed something different in Sarah's expression. "Are you okay? You look worried." Sarah hesitated. The discovery about Ms. Johnson had left her vulnerable, and Gabriel's constant kindness made her want to trust him. But there was an invisible barrier between their worlds that she didn't know how to cross. "I'm fine," she lied, starting to clean the counters with mechanical movements. Gabriel watched her for a few minutes. There was something in the tension of her shoulders, in the way she avoided looking directly at him, that alerted him that something was wrong. "Sarah," he said gently, "I know we haven't known each other long, but if you need to talk about anything, I'm here." The simple kindness in his voice almost made her crumble. Sarah stopped cleaning and leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of the last few weeks. The pregnancy, the fears, the uncertainties, and now Ms. Johnson's persecution. "It's complicated," she managed to say. "Maybe I can help." Sarah looked him in the eyes for the first time that night and saw a sincerity that completely disarmed her. "You already help," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The vitamins, the new schedules. I know it's you." Gabriel froze for a moment, realizing that his attempt at discretion had been discovered. "How?" "The vitamins are exactly what my doctor recommended, but I can't afford them. The schedules changed right after we met. And She hesitated. "You always show up here when I'm working." Gabriel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Sarah had learned to recognize as a sign that he was uncomfortable. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to feel indebted." "Why do you do this?" Sarah asked, curiosity overcoming her shyness. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you're a good person going through a tough time, and because—" He paused, as if weighing his words. "Because you remind me that there are important things beyond business." Before Sarah could fully process that declaration, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Gabriel quickly returned to organizing his papers, and Sarah resumed cleaning. Ms. Johnson appeared at the entrance of the break room, her small, calculating eyes sweeping the scene. "Sarah," she said in a voice too sweet to be genuine, "how nice to find you here. Mr. Smith, I hope our employee isn't disturbing your work." "Not at all," Gabriel replied curtly, not looking up from the documents. "Great. Sarah, when you're done here, I want to speak with you in my office." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Ms. Johnson never called her for private conversations, especially not in the middle of a shift. 20 minutes later, Sarah was knocking on the door of the supervision office on the ground floor. The room was small and claustrophobic, with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that took up half the space. The walls were decorated with safety notices and a photo of Ms. Johnson receiving some Employee of the Month award from years ago. "Sit down," Ms. Johnson said, indicating the chair in front of the desk. She remained standing, a tactic of intimidation that Sarah recognized immediately. "Sarah, I'm worried about you," the supervisor began, her voice heavy. Sarah felt a surge of false concern. "I've been receiving reports about irregularities in your behavior." "What kind of irregularities?" "Inappropriate conversations with superiors, unauthorized use of executive facilities, accepting benefits that are not due to you." Ms. Johnson paused theatrically. "Is someone giving you expensive vitamins, Sarah?" Sarah's blood boiled, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, girl. I know someone is giving you gifts, and that's against company rules. Personal favoritism can result in termination for cause, both for the recipient and the giver." The barely concealed threat made Sarah sit up straighter in her chair. "Ms. Johnson, I have worked here for 5 months, without a single absence or tardiness. I fulfill my obligations and always maintain professionalism. If there are any specific accusations against me, I would like them to be officially documented." The firm tone and formal language caught Ms. Johnson off guard. She was used to employees who intimidated easily. "Watch your tone, Sarah. Pregnant women don't have as much protection in the job market as you think, especially single pregnant women." The gratuitous cruelty of the remark felt like a slap. Sarah felt tears of anger and humiliation burning in her eyes, but she refused to give her supervisor the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "May I return to work?" she asked, her voice controlled but tense. "You may. But Sarah, be careful with the company you keep. Powerful men don't stay interested in women like you for long. And when the interest fades, you'll be left with nothing." Sarah left the room with trembling legs and a pounding heart. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and finally allowed the tears to fall. The humiliation burned like fire, but worse than that was the fear. Fear of losing her job, fear of not being able to support her daughter, fear that Ms. Johnson was right about Gabriel. She didn't know that, 2 floors above, Gabriel had watched the entire scene through security cameras. And for the first time in his corporate career, he was planning an intervention that would completely change the rules of the game. Gabriel spent the next night unable to focus on any documents. The images of Sarah leaving Ms. Johnson's office visibly shaken wouldn't leave his mind. He had observed the entire scene through the monitoring system, and although he couldn't hear the conversation, the body language of the two women spoke for itself. Ms. Johnson's intimidating posture, the growing tension in Sarah's shoulders, and finally, the tears in the hallway. All of it filled him with a cold anger he rarely experienced. The next morning, Gabriel summoned Richard Adams, the Human Resources Director, for a meeting in his office. Richard was a 50-year-old, efficient and discreet man who had worked at the company for over a decade and knew all the ins and outs of personnel management. "Richard, I need information about our cleaning supervisor, Ms. Johnson," Gabriel said, getting straight to the point. "And about an employee named Sarah Johnson." Richard opened his tablet and accessed the employee files. "Ms. Johnson has been with us for 8 years. Clean disciplinary record, some minor complaints about excessive strictness, but nothing officially documented. Sarah Johnson, let me see, 5 months with the company. Hired as a cleaning assistant, graduated in English, currently pregnant. I want all performance reports, time records, and any documentation related to these 2 employees on my desk by the end of the day," Gabriel instructed. "And Richard, this is confidential." The director nodded, accustomed to unusual requests from the CEO, but clearly curious about the sudden interest in low-level employees. By 7 in the evening, Gabriel had a stack of documents in front of him that confirmed his worst suspicions. The reports on Sarah were contradictory, while the work evaluations were impeccable. There were a series of verbal warnings recorded by Ms. Johnson for vague reasons: inappropriate posture, misuse of facilities, and inappropriate behavior with superiors. All dated after the first meeting between him and Sarah, but it was the most recent report that made Gabriel clench his fists on the table. Ms. Johnson had initiated a formal disciplinary process against Sarah, alleging accepting unauthorized benefits from third parties and establishing inappropriate relationships with hierarchical superiors. The document suggested disciplinary suspension followed by possible termination for cause. Gabriel picked up the phone and called Richard. "I want you here now, and bring the internal regulations on disciplinary processes." An hour later, the 2 men were immersed in legal documentation and labor regulations. Gabriel had made a decision that he knew was risky but necessary. "Richard, I'm going to need you to reorganize the cleaning shifts. I want Ms. Johnson transferred to the morning shift, responsible only for the ground and basement floors. And I want Sarah Johnson transferred to an administrative position." "Gabriel," Richard said carefully, "are you sure about this? Promoting a cleaner directly to an administrative position will raise questions, and transferring a supervisor without documented justification could result in a labor lawsuit." "Then let's document the justifications," Gabriel replied, his voice filled with a determination that Richard rarely saw. "I want a complete audit of Ms. Johnson's supervisory procedures, interview other cleaning staff, check time records, investigate each of those warnings she gave to Sarah." Richard took notes quickly. "And what about Sarah Johnson? What would be the justification? For the promotion?" Gabriel had already thought about this. "She has a college degree, has demonstrated competence and dedication, and we need someone to manage the new benefits program for low-income employees that I am planning to implement. Who better than someone who understands the real needs of this population?" It was a smart move, Gabriel knew. The benefits program was something he had been considering for months, partially inspired by his conversations with Sarah about the difficulties faced by low-income workers. Promoting her to manage this project would not only be a plausible justification, but also a way to utilize. Marina lived her days in a constant state of alert. Since the conversation with Ms. Johnson, each shift felt like a survival mission. The supervisor appeared with unprecedented frequency, always looking for flaws, always with a cutting comment on the tip of her tongue. Marina felt like a cornered animal, knowing that the predator was just waiting for the right moment to strike. The situation reached its limit one Thursday night when Marina discovered that Ms. Johnson had rummaged through her personal locker in the staff room. Her things were slightly out of place, and the bottle of vitamins she kept there had disappeared. Furious and desperate, Marina rushed up to the 40th floor, looking for Gabriel. She had no plan, hadn't thought about the consequences. She just knew she could no longer endure the silent pursuit. She found him in his office, working under the yellow light of a bronze lamp. When he looked up and saw her distressed face, he immediately stood up from his chair. "Marina, what happened?" "She went through my things," Marina said, her voice trembling with anger. "Miss Johnson entered my locker and took the vitamins, and she's making up lies about me, saying that I accept favoritism, that I have an inappropriate relationship with superiors." Gabriel walked around the desk and approached her, noticing how her hands were shaking. "Sit down," he said gently, indicating the armchair in front of his desk. "Tell me everything." Marina poured her heart out. She spoke about the unfair warnings, the malicious investigation, the constant humiliations, and the veiled threats. As she spoke, she saw Gabriel's expression becoming increasingly grim. "She said that powerful men don't stay interested in women like me for long," Marina finished, the words coming out like a painful confession. "That when the interest fades, I'll be left with nothing." Gabriel was silent for a long moment, processing the gratuitous cruelty of those words. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but Marina could feel the cold anger behind the apparent calm. "Marina, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." She nodded. "Do you trust me?" The question caught her off guard. Marina studied him, that powerful man who could have anything he wanted, but chose to spend his late nights talking with the pregnant janitor about literature and grandma's recipes. "Yes," she said simply. "Then trust that I will resolve this, but the right way, legally, without harming you in the process. Gabriel, I don't want you to get into trouble because of me." He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "Marina, I want you to understand one thing. Any problem I might face is worth it if it means protecting you and your daughter. Ms. Johnson is abusing her position, and that is not just wrong, it's unacceptable." The following Friday, Marina received an unexpected summons to the Human Resources Department. Her first thought was that Ms. Johnson had managed to fire her, and she went up to the 20th floor with her heart in her throat. Ricardo Mendez greeted her with a professional but genuinely warm smile. "Marina, please have a seat. We have some changes to discuss with you." She sat rigidly on the edge of the chair, bracing herself for the worst. "First, I want to inform you that an internal audit on the disciplinary procedures of the cleaning supervision has been completed. Several irregularities were identified, and corrective measures are being taken." Marina blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means that all disciplinary actions initiated against you have been dismissed due to lack of grounds, and Ms. Johnson has been transferred to other roles where her supervisory style can be more appropriately monitored." Marina felt her legs go weak with relief. "Secondly," Ricardo continued, "I would like to offer you a new position in the company. We are creating a benefits and assistance program for low-income employees, and we need someone with your background and personal experience to coordinate it." Marina was speechless. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of, using her education in literature and her life experience to help people in situations similar to hers. The salary would be $2,500 with full benefits, including a family health plan, Ricardo added. Obviously, you would have job security during maternity leave and a suitable work environment for a pregnant woman. Tears of gratitude filled Marina's eyes. I accept," she managed to say. After the meeting, Marina left the building with a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in months. On the bus back home, She touched her belly, where her daughter was actively moving, and whispered, "Did you hear that, my love? Mommy got a real job. Our life is going to be different now." She didn't know that Gabriel had watched her leave through the windows of his office, a genuine smile of satisfaction on his face. For the first time in a long time, he had used his power for something truly important. And in the weeks that followed, as Marina settled into her new role, they would both discover that this intervention was just the first step in a journey that would completely transform their lives. August arrived with a dry chill that penetrated to the bone, and Marina still couldn't believe the complete transformation her life had undergone. In just 1 week, her new office was on the 18th floor, a modest but comfortable space with a light wood desk, an ergonomic chair that fit her 7-month belly perfectly, and a view of Central Park that she never tired of contemplating during breaks. The benefits program she was developing was already taking shape on paper. Marina spent her days creating surveys to understand the real needs of low-income employees, establishing partnerships with community health clinics, negotiating discounts at supermarkets and pharmacies, and designing a corporate daycare system that could cater to infants and school-aged children. It was the kind of work that gave meaning to her mornings. She was finally using her academic background and personal experience to make a difference in the lives of others. But the most significant change was in the dynamic of her relationship with Gabriel. Previously, their encounters were coincidental, charged with an indefinable tension between boss and employee. Now, as the coordinator of a project that reported directly to the presidency, Sarah had official weekly meetings with him. And in those meetings, she discovered layers of Gabriel Smith that she had never imagined existed. Single mothers represent 42% of our female workforce. Sarah reported on a Tuesday morning, sitting across the mahogany table in the presidential office. Most spend over 30% of their income just on informal childcare. If we offer quality daycare in the building, we not only reduce this expense, but we also decrease absenteeism and increase productivity. Gabriel listened to her with an attention that went beyond professional. He observed how her eyes lit up when she spoke about helping other women, how she gestured delicately to emphasize important points, how she unconsciously caressed her belly when concentrating on complex numbers. She had thrived in that environment. The nervous shyness of a pregnant cleaner had given way to the confidence of a professional who deeply understood her field. "And what about the budget for implementation?" he asked, forcing himself to focus on the technical aspects, when his mind wanted only to observe the graceful movement of her hands over the documents. Initial estimate of $200,000 for space adaptation and equipment. Monthly operational costs of approximately $50,000. But with a return expected in 6 months, considering reduced turnover and increased productivity. Gabriel smiled. Sarah had learned to speak the language of business with a naturalness that impressed him. "Approved," he said simply. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Just like that? No review from the board? No analysis from the finance department?" "Sarah, you presented solid data, a consistent economic justification, and a detailed implementation plan. More importantly, you understand the real needs of the people this program will benefit because you have lived that reality." Gabriel leaned slightly forward. "I trust your work." The simple, straightforward trust made Sarah's heart race. It was the first time in her life that someone in a position of authority not only valued her opinion, but acted on it, without question. "Thank you," she said, her voice laden with genuine emotion. It means everything to me." They looked at each other for a moment that extended beyond the professional, a moment where both felt the subtle current of attraction they had been ignoring for months. Gabriel was the first to break eye contact, clearing his throat and returning to the documents. "Is there anything else that needs my approval today?" Sarah consulted her notes, trying to regain her professional focus. Yes, the partnership with Maplewood University to offer training courses for employees, continuing education, basic computer skills, instrumental English. We want to provide real growth opportunities. Your alma mater, Gabriel noted, recalling details from previous conversations. Yes, I managed to secure a special discount through the extension coordination. They are willing to bring the classes here in the evening, so it won't interfere with work. Gabriel nodded, but Sarah noticed a shadow cross his face. Is there a problem? No, it's just... He hesitated. Have you thought about finishing your studies? Maybe pursuing a graduate degree? The question caught Sarah off guard. It was something she had abandoned when she discovered her pregnancy and Raphael left her. Life, but it secretly haunted her during sleepless nights. I do think about it, but right now it's not possible. With the baby coming, all priorities change. What if it didn't have to be a choice between one or the other? Gabriel asked carefully. The company has a scholarship program for employees. It could cover the costs of a specialization in social management or public administration, areas that align perfectly with your current work. Sarah felt a wave of possibilities opening in her mind, immediately followed by a wave of insecurity. Gabriel, you've already done so much for me. I don't want it to seem like I'm taking advantage. He stood up from his chair and walked around the table, stopping at a respectful distance from her. Sarah, I need you to understand one thing. Everything I offer because you deserve it professionally. Your ideas are brilliant, your dedication is exemplary, and you have a unique perspective that that any company needs. He paused. It's not a favor, it's an investment in talent. The words created a warmth in Sarah's chest that had nothing to do with professional gratitude and everything to do with how Gabriel made her feel valued as a person. I'll think about it, she promised. The rest of the meeting proceeded in safer territory, budgets, timelines, logistics. But when Sarah stood up to leave, Gabriel accompanied her to the door in a way that wasn't strictly necessary. Sarah, he said when she was already in the hallway. Yes? If you need anything at all, you know where to find me. It was the same offer he had made months ago in the executive break room, but now it carried a different weight. It wasn't the powerful CEO offering condescending help to a needy employee. It was a man who genuinely cared, offering support to a woman who had become important in his life. Sarah took the elevator down with a confused heart. The line between professional gratitude and personal feelings was becoming increasingly thin, and she didn't know whether it scared or excited her. That same week, Sarah experienced a moment that would define the course of her feelings. It was Thursday night, and she had stayed late organizing interviews to select employees interested in the training program. The building was almost empty, with only a few executives on the upper floors and the security team making their rounds. When the elevator stopped on the 18th floor, Sarah was surprised to find Gabriel waiting for her in the hallway. Working late again? He asked with a smile. Last interview of the day, Sarah replied, showing the folder with documents. 53 applications for the training program. It's amazing how people want to grow when they have the opportunity. They walked together towards the elevators, a casual closeness that had already become natural. In the elevator, Gabriel pressed the button for the ground floor, but then hesitated over the panel. Sarah, can I ask you a personal question? She looked at him through the elevator mirror. Sure. Are you afraid of being a mother? The question was unexpected and vulnerable in a way that Gabriel rarely showed. Sarah turned to face him directly. Every day, she admitted, I'm afraid I won't know what to do, that I won't be enough, that I won't be able to give her everything she deserves. Gabriel nodded slowly. My mom was afraid too. She said every day of pregnancy was a mix of immense love and absolute terror. It was the first time Gabriel mentioned his family in such a personal way, and Sarah felt he was sharing something important. Did she tell you that? When I was 15 and going through a rebellious phase, she said that fear didn't mean she didn't love me. It meant she loved me so much that she wanted to get everything right. Gabriel smiled fondly at the memory. She did get it right, even with fear. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, but neither of them moved to exit. You're going to be a wonderful mother, Sarah. I'm absolutely sure of it. The sincerity in his voice made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. How can you be so sure? Gabriel looked her in the eyes, and Sarah saw something in them that made her realize that the territory of their relationship had changed irrevocably. Because I know you. I see how dedicated you are to everything you love, how you put your heart into every project, how you genuinely care about people. Your daughter will have all of that, and more. They finally exited the elevator, but the emotional intimacy of that moment followed them to the building's door. When they said goodbye, Gabriel heading to his car in the executive parking lot, Sarah to the bus stop, both knew that something fundamental had changed between them. Sarah traveled home that night with an increasing certainty. She was falling in love with Gabriel Smith, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. The end of August brought news that would completely change the dynamic that Sarah and Gabriel had carefully built over the past weeks. It was a Friday morning when Helen Smith, the matriarch of the family and majority partner in the company, decided to make a surprise visit to her son's office. Helen was a 65-year-old woman who carried the natural elegance of high society like a second skin. A law graduate from Ivy League University in the 1980s, when few women found space in the profession, she had built an empire parallel to her husband's through strategic investments in art and real estate. A widow for 5 years, she was now fully dedicated to ensuring that the Smith family legacy continued through Gabriel. "Gabriel," she said, using the childhood diminutive as she entered the presidential office without knocking, followed by her personal assistant, carrying a planner and a tablet. "We need to talk." Gabriel looked up from the documents he was reviewing, reports on the benefits program that Sarah had prepared with such care, and felt the familiar knot in his stomach that his mother's visits always provoked. "Mom, what a surprise. You should have let me know you were coming." "If I had, you would have come up with some meeting to avoid me," Helen replied with the sharp smile that Gabriel knew well. She sat in the armchair in front of his desk with the upright posture of someone born to lead. "I'm worried about you, dear." "Worried? Your priorities seem strange. Marcia Anderson told me that you declined the introduction dinner with her daughter, a beautiful girl, graduated in international relations from Sorbonne, impeccable family." Gabriel sighed. Marcia Anderson was one of his mother's closest friends, and her daughter Lily was exactly the type of woman Helen considered ideal for him. Beautiful, educated, wealthy, and, most importantly, suitable for the social standard she expected for the family. "Mom, we've talked about this. I'm not interested in arranged marriages." "It's not an arranged marriage, Gabriel. It's an opportunity to meet someone compatible. You're 40 years old. It's time to think about starting a family, about giving your mother grandchildren." Gabriel stood up from his chair and walked to the window, looking out at the city stretching below. He knew this conversation was inevitable, but he wasn't prepared for it. "And there's another thing," Helen continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "I heard you've been making questionable changes in the company, promoting employees without criteria, creating unnecessary welfare programs." Gabriel's blood ran cold. He turned to face his mother. "What exactly are you talking about?" This Sarah, Johnson, a cleaner who became a manager overnight, pregnant, single, without the proper qualifications. Helen consulted her notes on the tablet. You spent $200,000 on a program created by her without consulting the board. That's not responsible management, Gabriel. Anger began to boil in Gabriel's chest. Someone had given his mother information, probably someone from the board who felt threatened by the changes he had been implementing. Sarah Johnson has a degree in literature, proven competence, and is creating the most innovative community program this company has ever had. Her qualifications include real experience with the issues the program aims to address. Real experience? Helen laughed, a cutting sound. Gabriel, you're talking about a pregnant cleaner you pulled out of poverty. Of course, she's going to be grateful, but confusing gratitude with competence is a rookie mistake. You don't know Sarah? I don't need to know. I know the type, Helen continued. He stood up, his commanding posture dominating the room. Women like that are clever, dear. They know exactly how to manipulate good and naive men. She seduced you with the story of the poor abandoned pregnant woman, and you fell for it like a duckling. Gabriel felt a cold fury taking over him, a kind of anger he rarely experienced. Stop, now. Gabriel, I am your mother and a partner in this company. It is my duty to warn you when you are making mistakes that could harm our family and our business. Sarah Johnson is a competent professional who is doing an exceptional job. If you have issues with my administrative decisions, we can discuss them in a formal board meeting. Helen studied him for a long moment, her calculating eyes processing every nuance of her son's reaction. You are involved with her, she finally said, not as a question, but as a statement. Gabriel did not respond, but his expression confirmed his mother's suspicions. My God, Gabriel, an employee, pregnant by another man. Have you completely lost your mind? What I do in my personal life is none of your business. It is when it affects our family and our company. Do you think she loves you? Do you think she is not just after the money, the security, the opportunity to climb the social ladder? Helen's words cruelly echoed the threats that Ms. Johnson had made to Sarah months before. Gabriel stepped closer to his mother, his voice low but filled with authority. Sarah never asked for anything. She never took advantage. She never tried to exploit. Everything she achieved was through her own merit. What touching naivety, Helen murmured. Gabriel, I need you to understand. If you continue with this association, it will be impossible to keep you as CEO. The board will not accept it. It was a direct threat, and they both knew it. Helen held 40% of the company's shares through inheritance and had enough influence with other shareholders to cause real problems. Are you threatening me? I am warning you about inevitable consequences. Men in positions like yours cannot afford inappropriate relationships. Gabriel remained silent for a long moment, processing not only his mother's words, but the revelation that someone had been watching and reporting his actions. The intimacy he and Sarah had built over the past weeks had been violated by prying eyes and malicious gossip. You may leave, he finally said. Gabriel. Now. Helen gathered her things with the wounded dignity of someone unaccustomed to being dismissed, but before leaving, she turned for one last jab. She will destroy you, my son. And when that happens, don't say I didn't warn you. Alone in his office, Gabriel sat heavily in the chair and ran his hands over his face. The conversation with his mother had exposed a reality he had been avoiding. His interest in Sarah was not a secret, and that put her in a vulnerable position he had not adequately considered. It was in that moment of emotional turmoil that Sarah knocked on the door. It was their regular weekly meeting, but Gabriel was not in a position to pretend normalcy. Come in, he said, trying to control his voice. Sarah entered, with her usual folder of documents, but immediately sensed that something was wrong. Gabriel looked worn out, tense in a way she had never seen before. "Is everything okay?" she asked, closing the door and approaching the desk. Gabriel looked at her, so beautiful, so genuine, so completely unaware of the political storm brewing around them, and felt a pain in his chest. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." She sat down slowly, sensing that her life was about to be turned upside down again. "My mother was here today. Found out about us." "About us?" Sarah repeated, confused. "There's nothing between us but work." Gabriel looked her in the eyes. "Yes, there is, and we both know it." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Sarah felt her heart race, a mix of fear and relief that they had finally arrived at the territory they had been avoiding for months. "What did your mother say?" Gabriel told her everything. The veiled threats, the pressure on his position as CEO, the accusations about Sarah's motives. As he spoke, he saw the color drain from her face. "She thinks I'm a gold digger," Sarah said when he finished, her voice barely a whisper. "She doesn't know you." "But she knows the type, doesn't she?" Sarah abruptly stood up, starting to pace the room. "The pregnant cleaner who seduced the rich boss. It's such an old story that it even has its own cliché." "Sarah?" "Maybe she's right," Sarah continued, her voice rising in desperation. "Maybe I did take advantage subconsciously. Maybe—" Gabriel stood up and grabbed her arms, forcing her to stop and look at him. "Stop, right now. You never took advantage of anything. You deserve everything you've achieved. You deserve the job. You deserve respect. You deserve—" "Deserve what?" she asked, tears finally falling. "Deserve to ruin your career, your relationship with your family, your position in the company?" Gabriel pulled her closer, and Sarah did not resist. "You deserve to be loved," he said simply, "completely, unconditionally, without social barriers or family expectations." The confession hung between them like a bomb exploding in silence. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw everything she had been trying to deny. Gabriel Smith was in love with her just as much as she was with him. "Gabriel," she whispered, "this is going to destroy us. Then at least we will be destroyed together." And there, in the presidential office overlooking New York City, they finally admitted what had been growing between them for months. But they both knew that confessing their love was just the first step in a battle that would test everything they believed about themselves and what truly mattered in life. September arrived laden with a tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the corporate building. Sarah felt the eyes following her down the halls, some curious, others clearly hostile. The news about her closeness with Gabriel had spread through informal channels. The company buzzed with the characteristic speed of office gossip. Every overly formal greeting, every conversation that ceased when she approached, every forced smile reminded her that she had become the center of a silent scandal. The benefits program was progressing magnificently. Enrollments for the corporate daycare exceeded all expectations. Training courses had waiting lists, and partnerships with community clinics had already benefited dozens of employees. But Sarah could hardly feel satisfaction with her professional success when each day in the office felt like a social minefield. Gabriel, on the other hand, faced pressures that went far beyond family expectations. 3 board members had requested urgent meetings to discuss corporate governance issues. His major investors had begun to ask subtle questions about leadership stability. And Helen had intensified her personal campaign, appearing in his office almost daily with new arguments, new threats disguised as maternal concern. It was on a particularly tumultuous Tuesday that the situation exploded publicly. Sarah was in the break room on the 18th floor, preparing coffee during a break between meetings, when Lily Anderson appeared accompanied by Helen. The 28-year-old was everything Sarah was not: tall, blonde, slim, wearing an outfit that cost more than 3 of Sarah's paychecks. Her demeanor suggested she was used to being desired and envied in equal measure. "So you are Sarah Johnson," Lily said, her sweet voice laced with an almost imperceptible hostility. "I've heard so much about you." Sarah turned, holding the coffee cup with slightly trembling hands. Helen watched the scene with cruel satisfaction, like a predator observing its prey face off. "Lily, dear, let me introduce you properly," Helen intervened. "Sarah, this is Lily Anderson, daughter of my friend Marcia. Lily just returned from Paris and is considering some investment opportunities here in New York City." The message was clear. Lily was the family-approved choice, the official candidate for Gabriel's heart. "Nice to meet you," Sarah said politely, although every fiber of her being screamed to leave immediately. "The pleasure is mine," Lily replied, examining Sarah from her toes to her hair pulled back in a simple bun. "How interesting your work here is. Gabriel told me about your community projects." The tone suggested that Gabriel had described Sarah's work as amateur charity work. "Actually, our benefits program is being studied by other companies as a model for corporate social responsibility," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the growing embarrassment. "How admirable," Helen murmured. "Although I always believed that true charity is best done through traditional organizations, established institutions with proven track records, not through internal experiments." Sarah understood perfectly that she was being professionally belittled. Her achievements were reduced to charity and experiments, as if she were a child playing executive. "Excuse me," Sarah said, deciding that her dignity was worth more than any confrontation. "I have a meeting." She headed for the door, but Lily's voice stopped her. "Sarah, may I ask you a question? Woman to woman?" Sarah turned, knowing that anything that followed would be a trap, but unable to simply ignore it. "Sure. Do you really believe it's fair? A man like Gabriel, with the responsibilities he has, the social position, the family expectations, is it fair to pull him into a situation that can only harm him?" The question was posed with an apparent sincerity that made the blow even more precise. Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "I didn't pull anyone into anything." "Of course not consciously," Lily continued with an understanding smile. "But sometimes our need, our vulnerability, can make us unconsciously put people we care about in impossible positions." Helen watched approvingly. Lily was doing exactly what she expected, planting seeds of doubt without sounding directly cruel. "Gabriel is a good man," Lily continued, "too generous for his own good sometimes. He sees a woman in distress, especially a strong woman like you facing motherhood alone, and his protective instinct kicks in." But, Sarah asked, although she knew she shouldn't feed that conversation, "but men like him have obligations that go beyond personal feelings, the company, the shareholders, the thousands of jobs that depend on his decisions. Would it be fair to put all that at risk for a relationship that society will never accept?" The words hit Sarah exactly where she was most vulnerable. For weeks, she'd been struggling with those same doubts, trying to convince herself that love could overcome social barriers and economic differences. "You have a daughter on the way," Helen added, her voice taking on an apparently maternal tone. "Wouldn't it be better for her to grow up in a stable environment without the burden of being known as the daughter of the woman who destroyed Gabriel's proper marriage?" Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes, but refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "You don't know Gabriel if you think he can be manipulated or controlled by anyone," she said, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "And you don't know me if you think I would do anything to harm him." She left the break room with as much dignity as she could muster, but in the hallway she leaned against the wall and allowed the tears to fall. Every word from those women echoed fears she, had been trying to suffocate. What if they were right? What if she really was being selfish by allowing Gabriel to risk everything for her? Gabriel found Sarah in her office 2 hours later, sitting in front of the computer with red eyes and a distant expression he recognized immediately. "What happened?" he asked, closing the door behind him. Sarah recounted the encounter in the break room, watching as Gabriel's expression grew darker with each word she spoke. "They have no right to treat you like that," he said when she finished, his voice heavy with concern. A cold anger. "Maybe they're right," Sarah murmured, unable to look him in the eyes. "How can you say that? Gabriel, look around us. Gossip, tension, your family threatening you, the board questioning your leadership. It all started because of us." Gabriel moved closer to her table, resting his hands on the wooden surface. "Sarah, do you think I care about gossip? That I care about the opinions of people who judge without knowing?" "You should care," she replied, finally looking at him. "Your career, your company, your family, all of it matters, and I can't be the reason you lose any of those things." Gabriel walked around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, listen closely to what I'm going to say. You are not a burden in my life. You are the best thing that has happened to me. Before I met you, I was living on autopilot, following expectations, fulfilling obligations. You reminded me what it feels like to be passionate about something beyond spreadsheets and reports." "But what about your family and the company?" "The company will continue to thrive because we are making the right decisions. And as for my family..." Gabriel paused. "My family will have to accept that I am an adult capable of making my own choices." Sarah gently touched his face, memorizing every feature as if it could be the last time. "What if they don't accept it? Then it will be their problem, not ours." But even as he said those words, Gabriel knew the reality was more complicated. Helen had made it clear that the professional consequences would be real and immediate, and Sarah, with her sharp intelligence and generous heart, knew he was simplifying a situation that could destroy everything he had worked for. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts, knowing that difficult decisions would have to be made soon. The love they felt for each other was real and powerful, but the world around them was determined to prove that love is not always enough to overcome obstacles created by social differences, family expectations, and economic pressures. The rain began to patter against the office windows, and Sarah wondered if it was a portent of the storms yet to come. The morning of October 15th began like any other, but would become a turning point in the lives of Sarah and Gabriel. Sarah was at home, in the small apartment she now shared only with Jessica. Fernanda had moved out the previous month to live with her boyfriend when she felt the first contractions. They were subtle at first, like intensified menstrual cramps, but Sarah immediately knew something was different. At 8 months pregnant, she had mentally prepared for the possibility of premature labor. The doctor from the health plan that Gabriel had discreetly included in his benefits package had warned her about the risks associated with emotional stress, and the last few weeks had been a roller coaster of professional and personal tensions. "Jessica," she called, trying to keep calm in her voice, "I think I need to go to the hospital." Jessica, who was getting ready for her shift at the store, immediately dropped everything and ran to the room. "Already? But there's still a month to go." "Babies don't follow schedules," Sarah said, trying to force a smile as a stronger contraction made her lean against the wall. The journey to the General Hospital, the same place where Gabriel had been born 40 years earlier, ironically, was an eternity of 30 minutes through the morning traffic of New York City. Sarah tried to focus on the breathing techniques she had learned in her childbirth classes, but the pain was intensifying rapidly. At the hospital, the medical team confirmed that she was in advanced premature labor. The baby, although small, was in the proper position and both their vital signs were stable, but the next moments would be critical. "Do you have someone to notify?" the nurse asked as they prepared Sarah for the delivery room. "The father of the child? Any family?" Sarah hesitated. Her only close family was an aunt in a small town in the south who could barely travel. And as for the father, Ryan had completely disappeared from her life, even changing his phone number. "There's one person," she finally said, giving Gabriel's number. "But he might be busy." What Sarah didn't know was that Gabriel was in one of the most important meetings of his career at that very moment. The board had called an extraordinary session to discuss leadership and governance issues, which was a corporate euphemism for questioning his command due to inappropriate personal choices. Helen was sitting at the head of the long conference table, flanked by the most influential board members. Gabriel recognized the setup immediately. It was a tribunal, not a meeting. "Gabriel," Helen began with her formal meeting voice, "we are concerned about the direction the company is taking. Unilateral decisions, costly programs without proper approval, and mainly," she paused for effect, "personal distractions that may affect your judgment. If you're referring to the benefits program, the results speak for themselves," Gabriel replied, maintaining a professional tone. 22% turnover reduction, 15% productivity increase, and media recognition as a socially responsible company. "We are not questioning the program's numbers," interjected Robert Foster, one of the senior board members. "We are questioning the decision-making process and the influences behind those decisions." Gabriel felt his blood boil, but he kept his composure. "If you have any specific accusations to make, please do so directly." It was then that his phone vibrated discreetly in his pocket. Normally, he would never answer during a board meeting, but something, perhaps intuition, perhaps fate, made him quickly glance at the screen. General Hospital. His heart raced, but he maintained a neutral expression as he put the phone down again, making a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Excuse me," he said, standing up from the chair. "I have a personal emergency." "Gabriel," Helen's voice carried a warning tone, "this meeting cannot wait. We are making crucial decisions about your future at the company." Gabriel looked her in the eyes, and she saw a determination there that she had rarely seen in her son. "Then go ahead," he said simply. "I'll be at the General Hospital if you need me." And he left the room, leaving a stunned silence behind. At the hospital, Gabriel burst through the maternity ward door like a man possessed, still wearing his meeting suit and with his hair disheveled from running across the parking lot. "Sarah Johnson," he said to the receptionist, trying to control his breathing. "Where is she? Are you a relative?" Gabriel hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I'm the father." It wasn't technically true, but at that moment, it was the only truth that mattered in his heart. The receptionist directed him to the labor and delivery unit, where he found Sarah being prepared for an emergency cesarean section. The labor had complicated. The baby was tangled in the umbilical cord, requiring immediate surgical intervention. "Gabriel," Sarah murmured when she saw him appear in the pre-delivery room, dressed in the hospital gown that a nurse had insisted he wear. You didn't have to come." "Of course I did," he said, taking her hand in his. "There was nowhere else in the world I would rather be." The next 3 hours were an emotional roller coaster. The surgery was successful, but the baby, a tiny girl weighing 4.8 pounds, had to be immediately transferred to the NICU due to respiratory difficulties. Sarah, still under the effects of anesthesia, could only see her daughter for a few seconds before she was taken away by the doctors. Gabriel stayed by her side throughout her recovery, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, being the support she had never had from anyone else. When Sarah finally woke up completely, her first words were, "How is she?" "She's fighting," Gabriel said honestly. "The doctors say the next few days will be critical, but she's strong, like her mother." Sarah began to cry, tears of fear, relief, exhaustion, and a deep gratitude for not facing that moment alone. "Gabriel," she whispered, "your meeting, your company. You shouldn't be here." Gabriel brushed a strand of hair from her face with infinite tenderness. "Sarah, listen closely. There is no meeting, company, or obligation in the world that is more important than you and this little girl. If they can't understand that, it's their problem." In the following 3 days, Gabriel practically lived at the hospital. He converted the waiting room into his temporary office, working on his laptop, while Sarah rested and keeping vigil in the NICU whenever she was well enough to visit her daughter. The baby, whom Sarah decided to name Sophia, meaning wisdom, was a tiny fighter. Connected to tubes and monitors, she opened her dark little eyes like her mother's and seemed to observe the world with a determined curiosity that moved even the most experienced doctors. It was during one of these vigils that Helen finally appeared at the hospital. Gabriel was sitting next to the incubator, softly talking to Sophia about books, music, and all the beautiful places in the world he would like to show her when he noticed his mother's presence. "So this is where you are," Helen said, observing the scene with an inscrutable expression. Gabriel didn't stand up, didn't take his eyes off the baby. "How did you know I was here?" "My son, you left a board meeting to rush to a hospital. Of course, I would find out." Helen approached the incubator and looked at Sophia. The baby was sleeping, her tiny fists clenched, as if preparing to fight any obstacle life might throw her way. "She is small," Helen murmured. "Premature," Gabriel explained, finally looking at his mother. "But the doctors are optimistic." Helen remained silent for several minutes, watching her son gaze at the baby with a devotion she had never seen, directed at anything or anyone. "Gabriel," she finally said, her voice softer than usual, "you know things are going to be different now, right? After you left the meeting, we made some decisions." Gabriel finally turned to face her. "What kind of decisions?" Helen sighed, looking older and more tired than he remembered. "You will remain as Chief Executive Officer, but with closer oversight from the board. And—" she hesitated. "Any decisions related to personal relationships that could affect the company must be discussed beforehand." Gabriel felt a cold anger rising in his chest. "You're trying to control my personal life. We are trying to protect the company. And whether you like it or not, we are also trying to protect you." Gabriel looked back at Sophia, then at the door of the room where Sarah was sleeping, finally back to his mother. "Mom, let me tell you something, and I want you to remember it well. This woman and this child are my family now. If the company cannot coexist with that reality, then maybe it's time for me to find other opportunities." It was the first time in his life that Gabriel had directly challenged his mother's authority. Helen studied him for a long moment, recognizing that the man before her was no longer the obedient son she had raised. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Gabriel gently touched the glass of the incubator, and Sophia, as if sensing his presence, opened her eyes and seemed to look directly at him. "I am absolutely sure." Helen nodded slowly, a reluctant acceptance in her voice. "Then we will have to find a way to make this work." It was the first sign that perhaps, just perhaps, love could truly overcome the barriers that the world had built between them. 6 weeks after Sophia's birth, the apartment that Gabriel had carefully purchased and furnished in Westside finally welcomed its first inhabitants. Sarah walked through the rooms with a mix of wonder and discomfort, still trying to process how quickly her life had changed. The space was perfect, not too ostentatious to hurt her pride, yet not too simple to lack the comfort she and Sophia needed. The crib was a work of art in soft shades of pink and white, with a nursing chair positioned near the window that overlooked the park. Gabriel had hired a decorator, but personally supervised every detail, from the musical mobile that played Brahms to the silent humidifier that kept the air suitable for Sophia's delicate lungs. Sarah was sitting in that chair on a sunny December morning, nursing Sophia while watching Gabriel struggle to assemble a new educational toy he had impulsively bought on his way home from work. His movements were clumsy. He clearly had no experience with assembly instructions involving colorful pieces and animal-shaped connectors. But the intense concentration he dedicated to the task made Sarah smile. "You know she's only 6 weeks old, right?" Sarah said, trying to suppress a laugh as Gabriel wrestled with what appeared to be a particularly stubborn wooden giraffe. "It's important to stimulate cognitive development early," Gabriel replied seriously, consulting the manual for the 3rd time. "This toy develops motor coordination and pattern recognition." "Gabriel, she can barely focus her eyes on objects more than 30 centimeters away." Gabriel paused and looked at Sophia, who was focused on her feeding, her tiny fingers surprisingly strong as they held Sarah's finger. "You're right," he admitted, dropping the wooden giraffe and moving closer to them. "Sometimes I get carried away." Sarah adjusted Sophia in her arms, and the baby immediately snuggled against her chest with a contented sigh that melted hearts. Gabriel watched this daily ritual with a reverence that never waned, impressed by how naturally Sarah had embraced motherhood. "How was the meeting with the board today?" Sarah asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders that always appeared when company matters came up. Gabriel sighed and sat on the arm of the chair, close enough to stroke Sophia's dark hair. "Better than I expected, actually. The benefits program was approved for expansion to other units, and—" he hesitated. "My mother publicly advocated for the creation of a corporate fund to support employees in vulnerable situations." Sarah raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Helen did that?" "I think Sophia broke some barriers," Gabriel said with a smile. "It's hard to hold on to prejudices when you see a 6-week-old baby struggling to breathe in a NICU." Helen's transformation had been one of the most surprising aspects of this period. The matriarch of the Smith family appeared at the apartment twice a week, always with carefully chosen gifts for Sophia and an increasingly respectful attitude towards Sarah. It wasn't exactly maternal warmth, but it was significant progress considering the initial hostility. "She asked if you would be willing to give a talk to the women's board of her charity hospital," Gabriel continued, "about motherhood at the base of the social pyramid and the importance of structured support programs." Sarah almost choked. "She wants me to speak to her friends? The same women who probably see me as the cleaner who seduced the boss? The same women who now recognize that you created the most effective community program they've ever seen in action? Helen isn't foolish, Sarah. She understands that you represent a valuable perspective that her social circle has never had access to." Sarah adjusted, Sophia in her arms, and walked to the window, watching the children playing in the park below. There was something deeply symbolic about that view. Children from different social backgrounds running together, laughing together, without the barriers that adults created between themselves. "Gabriel," she said without turning, "sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that we're here, that Sophia is healthy, that your family is accepting." Gabriel stood up and approached her, wrapping her and Sophia in a gentle embrace. "It's real, and it will continue to be real, but Sarah—" He paused. "There's something we need to talk about." The serious tone of his voice made Sarah turn in his arms. "What is it?" Gabriel took a deep breath, as if preparing for a leap into the dark. "I want to officially adopt Sophia. I want to be her father, not just in heart, but legally." and I want to marry you." Sarah froze for a moment, processing the words. "Gabriel." "Listen before you respond," he gently interrupted. "It's not about protecting you or saving the situation. It's about forming a family, because that's what we already are. It's about giving Sophia a complete identity, legal security, and showing the world that choices of the heart can create stronger bonds than genetics." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "And what about what people will say? Your mother, the board, society?" "Let them say," Gabriel replied, with a conviction she had never heard in his voice before. "Sarah, I spent 40 years living according to other people's expectations. Now I want to live according to my own values." Sophia chose that moment to open her eyes and look directly at Gabriel, as if assessing the man who offered to be her father. For a few magical seconds, the three of them stood there, connected by something deeper than words or circumstances. "There's one condition," Sarah finally said. "Anything. I want a prenuptial agreement that protects my financial independence. I don't want it ever to be said that I married for money." Gabriel smiled, not surprised by the request. It was exactly the kind of concern Sarah would have, to protect her dignity even in the midst of... "In a declaration of love," Sarah said, "I've spoken with my lawyer. The contract guarantees not only your independence, but also establishes an educational fund for Sophia and legal protections in case something happens to me." "What if our story doesn't work out?" Sarah asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. "What if we find out we're too different, that love isn't enough to overcome all barriers?" Gabriel took her face in his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "Then we'll face it when the time comes. But Sarah, I won't waste our chance at happiness out of fear of hypothetical problems. I've already wasted too much time being cautious." The next afternoon, Helen Smith made an unannounced visit, as had become her habit. But this time, she brought with her a small, elegant box that she carefully placed on the coffee table in the living room. "What is this?" Sarah asked, observing the box with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "It belonged to my mother-in-law," Helen said, her voice taking on a tone of reverence. "Gabriel's father's mother. She gave it to me when Gabriel was born, saying that one day he would give it to the woman he chose to start his own family." Sarah opened the box with trembling hands and found a simple yet elegant wedding band made of yellow gold, with a small diamond embedded in it. It wasn't ostentatious, it didn't scream wealth, but it carried the weight of family tradition. "Helen, I can't accept this." "Of course you can," the older woman replied, and for the first time since they met, Sarah heard genuine warmth in her voice. "You are my son's choice, and seeing how he looks at you and Sophia..." She paused. "I think my mother-in-law would approve." It was a moment of acceptance that neither of them had planned, but it sealed a peace they didn't even know they were seeking. 3 months later, on a sunny March morning, Sarah Johnson and Gabriel Smith were married in a small ceremony on the terrace of the very building where it all began. Sophia, now 4 months old and growing with remarkable vigor, slept peacefully in Helen's arms as the justice of the peace officiated the union. There were no crowds of guests or extravagant decorations. Only the people who truly mattered were present. Helen, Ricardo Mendez and his wife, Jessica, a few of Sarah's co-workers, and the staff from the corporate daycare that had become like an extended family. When it came time for the vows, Sarah looked into Gabriel's eyes and said, "I promise to love you, not despite our differences, but because of how they complete us. I promise to build a family with you based on respect, equality, and shared values. And I promise that our Sophia will grow up knowing that true love overcomes any barrier the world tries to build." Gabriel, in turn, declared, "I promise to honor not only the woman you are, but the journey you took to get here. I promise to be a father to Sophia with the same dedication that you show as her mother. And I promise that our family will be an example that choices of the heart create bonds stronger than any social convention." As they kissed, sealing the official union, Sophia opened her little eyes, as if she knew something important was happening. And perhaps she did. After all, she was witnessing the moment when a family was formed not by accident or obligation, but by conscious choice and true love. The sun was setting over New York City as the newlyweds returned home, carrying Sophia and dreams of a future built on solid foundations of mutual respect, true love, and shared values. Sarah Johnson Smith had moved from a cleaning room to a boardroom, from cleaner to executive, from single mother to beloved wife. But the most important transformation had not been social or economic. It had been the discovery that true love, one that recognizes worth beyond appearances, that chooses partners over convenience, that builds families based on respect rather than expectations. This love always finds a way to flourish, regardless of all the obstacles the world insists on placing in its path. And there, on the terrace where they had married, with the panoramic view of New York City stretching to the horizon and Sophia sleeping in her adoptive father's arms, Sarah finally understood that she had arrived at the place where she had always belonged. Not a specific social position, but beside someone who loved her exactly as she was.